Okay, friends, we are plugging away, and today we are going to jump from what we talked about yesterday, which was backstory, to flashbacks. Now, there is a difference. You might have heard them referred to in a similar way or kind of interchanging those terms. But for our purposes and for what I talk about, remember, backstory is kind of what the readers need to know, what might motivate you, what might have happened in your past to motivate you to kind of take this journey that you're taking in your book. Those details about you that we need to know and understand in order to really connect with your story. A flashback is a little bit different, so we're going to jump into this. We're also going to talk about whether you need them or not, and how to use them. So flashbacks kind of take us from current day to something that happened back in the day before present time. Now, this doesn't need to mean back into your childhood when you were 1 year old, 5 years old. It doesn't necessarily need to go all the way back. This could be a flashback to a week before your story started. It can feel very backstory-ish, but really what happens is the difference with a flashback is kind of like it's nuanced, but we're going to go through it. It usually happens very quickly, and then we just jump back to the present. We don't necessarily dwell back there. We don't take a deep dive. Think of a flashback as flashing back one scene, like it's just one scene that happened in the past, and then you're coming back to that moment. So even your character, you in your book, you might be like, oh, I remember that one time that this happened, and you might describe this flashback to us a bit, in a scene kind of way, and then you take us back to why that was relevant or why that got brought up. So a flashback is going to be told really as as an action scene. It's not going to be just super long-winded and descriptive and I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania and this is why all this matters. It's just a very quick scene. It might only be a few lines. It might just be like a paragraph, but you really need to write your flashbacks as you would a current scene on your timeline. Readers really need to feel them as a scene and as this action, as this moment, as this thing that happened. Again, they can be even a sentence, a paragraph, a couple pages, or even an entire chapter. That's fine. And I've seen that happen where all of a sudden you're taken back and you're reading this scene that is happening, in the past, and it's not backstory. It's not filling in those gaps for us. So, and I've seen it where it's multiple chapters as well. So it really is this kind of live, living scene action. So think of it as if you're writing your current timeline in present tense, you're going to want to write your flashbacks in present tense as well, so that they feel as alive as your current scenes do. Now, backstory you might write in past tense, right? You might say, I grew up, I lived here, I dated this guy, whatever it is. Those are going to be kind of the small differences. And you don't want this flashback to really distract the readers from your story. We don't want to be taken down this long tangent. Think of it like this. The importance of your flashback should really dictate how long it's going to be. So if this is a very, very vital flashback, the readers must know it. It's long, but it's important. That's okay. For example, I recently finished this book, Comeback, and Claire and Maya Fontaine, they're a mother and daughter team. They wrote this book about the daughter's journey into this kind of dark world and her comeback to her mother, her comeback to her life. And there were many chapters where the mom had to take us back to when her daughter was this little girl. We had to understand what was in her past. We had to understand what happened to her in order for us to really be able to move forward in the story and understand why this story, why the daughter does what she does. So you could kind of argue that it's maybe a bit of both backstory and flashback, but she did write it in present tense. She did write it in this very alive way where we feel that we're there with her. We see these things. She writes it as if we're back there with her. So it's a scene. It may be multiple scenes strung together, but it needs to be of vital importance, or else it kind of doesn't need to. It doesn't need to be included. Same with backstory. If we need to know it, we need to know it, and if we don't, we don't. If it's relevant that you had 10 siblings, tell us. And if not, we just don't really need to know. Or you can mention it kind of as the oldest of 10 siblings, or that type of in passing, where it kind of fills in a little bit and we get to know you as a person would another, oldest sibling kind of style, or whatever it is that maybe is more of a generalistic perspective on things. Otherwise, it's just not necessary. So when you're looking at your flashback, you want to really focus in on how you got into that scene and how you're getting out. Those transitions are going to be super important. You want to make sure you give your readers those clues as to, hey, I'm jumping in, I'm jumping out, I'm jumping out, I'm jumping in. A lot of times you're going to see this in combination or let me say this again. A lot of times you're going to see this done with a combination of techniques such as a section break, those 3 little asterisks, or a wavy line, or whatever it is, some visual cue that tells us, oh, hey, she's going off in a different direction here. We're making kind of a hard break in scenes. There's really no soft transition here that can be inserted. That's fine. You also may see some language that says, it was 1999, and, so we understand, oh, we just skipped back 20 years here. If we're following along in some type of chronology, or we know that there was a certain date that applied to the last scene, then when you're back out of it, you're going to give the same type of indication that we're out of it and it's not a continuation of this flashback scene. We need to understand where we went back to, just as importantly as the fact that we're not in that flashback anymore. So there is kind of this skill involved and this very thoughtful approach to making sure that your flashbacks fit in well, are the right length, and don't distract us from the story. If your flashback starts feeling like it's disconnected and all of a sudden when we jump back to the current story, we're like, where are we? What's going on? I don't remember this. That's kind of a clue. You, of course, aren't necessarily going to be able to see this as closely as someone who doesn't know your life, but it's kind of a clue if we feel like we just jumped in this deep end of this cold pool and we don't know where we are. We should be able to kind of get back to a warm place. Okay, that's right. She was on the train with the person and she took us back to that one time. So we should be able to connect those dots without very much stopping and thinking. It's that stopping and thinking and analyzing and remembering you don't want your readers to do. This should feel very seamless and flowy and something that just sticks together well. If they stop and are confused and have to try to piece this together, you're going to lose them. That really stops that drive. You don't want to do that. They're going to just kind of like give up. Imagine you're on a road trip, and if you had no maps and no street signs, you would just be driving around in circles. So you need to make sure that your book has those road signs for them, that you're using those little indicators in your words or visual cues that we're skipping around here, folks. Stay with me. I'll bring you back, I promise. So that really is very important, those transitions. You can also do something where you're utilizing something in your current story to take you back and make that connection. So think of like an object or a person or a place. You're in a movie theater and all of a sudden you get taken back to this time you're in a movie theater, and then you go back to the movie theater and you make those two connections there, or 3 connections, or whatever it is. Math isn't my thing. Stay with me here. Because you're in the movie theater, or you're with someone that brings you back to a certain time, or there's a certain type of dog or whatever it is, a chocolate ice cream cone. It doesn't matter, but when you utilize an object like that to really sew these scenes together, the readers are going to follow along. That's going to be, the connect the dot type of method. Okay, here's me sitting with my ice cream cone, and oh my gosh, this reminds me of the thing that happened 15 years ago. Let me tell you about that, because that's really important. What happens to this ice cream cone next, right? So without that flashback, you kind of have this seamless scene, and we're just flowing from here to there. The ice cream I'm holding the ice cream, and all of a sudden it falls, and my reaction is really the point of this scene. If that flashback is to occur in between me holding the ice cream and it falling in my reaction, it needs to be relevant there, and we have to tie it together, right? It's maybe not the best example, but I want to kind of simplify this so you see where a flashback might come into play and how you can kind of tie these things together. So, flashbacks can be used dispersed throughout your book. They can be more heavily in one area and not at all in another. There's really no requirements. There's no methods that must be utilized. It really depends on your story. It depends on your history. And it depends on whether or not these scenes from the past really belong. Another thing is that you don't necessarily need to have flashbacks. It's not like we're gonna, the readers won't know if something happened in your past that isn't in the book. But if there are flashbacks that kind of take us to a moment where we understand something without you describing it in real time and present day, that's going to be a much more effective tool. Let me explain that a little bit. Let's go back to the ice cream scene. I'm sitting there, I'm holding my ice cream. It falls and I react a certain way, which maybe is a little bit of an unexpected reaction. Instead of going, hey, by the way, readers, I had this reaction because of something that happened in my past and it was really hard and blah, blah, blah. And you go on and you kind of give us this little side note, sidebar. You pull us aside and go, by the way, this is why that happened. The flashback is used to replace that explanation. That flashback is the explanation. Your readers will infer, this happened because that thing in the past happened and she was already triggered by this, and this is why her reaction was the way it was. Now we understand why this seemingly out of character reaction occurred, because of this thing that happened in the past. You don't have to explain all that. And in fact, that's a better way to do things, because you don't take the readers aside and go, P.S., let me tell you a little ditty about something that happened in the past. You're not taking them out of the story with you and stepping aside and going, hey, stop the train for a minute, tea time out. I got to tell you something quick before we move on. That is, again, what slows down that narrative drive, which is what you don't want to do when you're telling a story. You want to keep the train wheels moving. So the flashback helps you move that along, gives you an opportunity to explain things without taking the readers out of your story. It keeps them in that story mind frame. We're watching this movie. We're in the action scenes with you. We don't need to be taken out of them to understand things. So again, there's no minimum requirement or maximum. I mean, your whole book shouldn't be a flashback, but maybe that happens somewhere. I don't know. I'm not aware of it, but they're really a tool to use to kind of give that short little snippet of previous memories that introduce some piece of information that's really important, some detail for the reader that they need to know, that helps you explain something without taking them out. It gives meaning to your story without you pumping the brakes and giving that explanation in kind of the current scene. So the most effective flashbacks are typically really short, powerful. They don't contain all that analysis and jabbering on and on about what just happened. There's no stopping that. So practice writing this flashback and really focus on understanding the difference between a flashback and backstory. They both can be used multiple times throughout your book. They both can be used hand in hand. There are reasons why both of them belong, and both of them are used very effectively. So that is our video for the day, flashbacks. It's I think one of the funnest things you can really write is taking us back in time and giving us, when you find a flashback that works, it's so fun. It really is fulfilling and satisfying to say, like, yes, this is really working. So I want to hear what you think. I really would love to hear what you think about the difference between backstory and flashback, and how you plan to utilize them, or how you've utilized them in your current draft. So let me know, and I would love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on this, and whether or not you think I'm onto something here. We'll see you in the next video.